The silent shadow, the early morning sun filtered through the blinds of Sundar Pichai's office in Mountain View. It cast long slats of golden light across the minimalist interior glass walls, neat whiteboards, and the subtle hum of innovation. Outside, the world saw a titan of technology, a man steering one of the most powerful companies in the world. But inside, Sundar carried something few noticed, a subtle weight, like a shadow that never quite left his side. He had always been quiet. Even as a child growing up in Chennai, India, Sundar had never been the loudest in the room. He observed. He listened. He thought before speaking. His silence, once mistaken for shyness, became the core of his strength. But it also meant that many parts of his life fears, regrets, unresolved memories remained buried. Even as the world praised him. One Monday morning, as Sundar stepped out of his black electric car and into the Googleplex, he had the odd feeling that something was off. It wasn't overt, nothing suspicious. No flashing alarms or breached notifications. It was more subtle, like a sixth sense, as if someone was watching. He brushed it off. The days were packed with board meetings, AI discussions, sustainability projects, and a call with a space agency partnering on a quantum data network. The world saw brilliance. But Sundar, he felt a growing disconnect, like a machine that performed without fully running on purpose anymore. That night, he received an anonymous email. 3 days, and you haven't seen me. But I see you. The silence you wear? I know it too. There was no name, no traceable IP, just those words. Cool, calm, personal. For a man who worked with some of the best cybersecurity experts on Earth, this should have triggered alarms. Yet, strangely, Sundar didn't react with panic. Instead, he felt curious. The next day, he paid closer attention. A reflection in a building's glass facade. A man sitting on a bench across from the main entrance, face partially obscured by a hood. At the airport, during a layover to Zurich, a woman with an old leather notebook kept glancing up every few minutes. And during a talk at Stanford, he noticed a man in the last row, taking no notes, just watching. Day 2, the unease turned into intrigue. Flashback. The spark of curiosity years ago. As a boy in Tamil Nadu, Sundar had a peculiar fascination with circuits. He would spend hours disassembling radios with his father, asking endless questions about transistors and current flow. But beyond the wires and solder, he remembered something else. A conversation. It was after dinner. His father, soft-spoken and thoughtful, had said, "You don't change the world by shouting. You change it by understanding something so deeply, it listens back." Sundar never forgot those words. Back in the present, that old sense of curiosity returned. Who was watching? Him? And why? On the 3rd day, things became clearer and stranger. At an internal summit in San Francisco, Sundar was scheduled to present on sustainable AI and its role in global education. Just before going on stage, his assistant handed him a plain white envelope, no markings, no sender. Inside, a single photograph. It was of him aged about 14, standing in front of his childhood school. He hadn't seen this image in decades. He didn't even remember it being taken. On the back, in handwriting that looked eerily familiar. Before you taught the world to search, you were still searching. The pen fell from his hand. His palms grew cold. This was no stalker. This was someone who knew, someone from before the headlines, before the boardrooms, before Chrome, Android, and Alphabet. The stranger later that evening. Sundar walked alone near the Embarcadero, hoping for quiet clarity. It was then he saw him again, the man from the glass reflection. But this time he stepped forward. He wore a simple brown jacket. His eyes were calm, but intense. There was no malice, no aggression, just something heavier. Truth. "I'm not here to harm you," the man said. "Then why follow me for 3 days?" Sundar asked. "To remind you," the man replied, "of what you've forgotten." They sat on a nearby bench, the city's lights shimmering over the water. "I know everything about your story," the man continued. The scholarships, the move to Stanford, The moments you wanted to quit. The nights you cried alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Mountain View, wondering if you'd ever make it. Sundar's breath caught. Who are you? The man hesitated, then answered quietly. Someone who made the opposite choice. A story untold, the man's name was Rahul. Years ago, he had been in the same physics club as Sundar in Chennai. Equally brilliant, equally curious. But life had taken them on different paths. Sundar had left India, pursued his dreams, and scaled heights few dared imagine. Rahul had stayed back by choice. He claimed and become a quiet educator in a village. School. I never applied to MIT, Rahul said. Not because I couldn't, but because I saw the need right here, in our streets. You went global. I went local. But maybe together we missed something. Sundar listened, silent. You once said in an interview, Rahul continued, that you wanted to make technology accessible to everyone. But what happens when technology moves faster than people? When the gap widens? The words hit hard. Rahul handed him a flash drive. Watch this when you're alone. It's not an attack. It's a reflection. And with that, he disappeared. Into the night, as silently as he had come, the tape back in his hotel room. Sundar inserted the flash drive. What he saw shook him. A compilation of interviews with children from remote parts of India, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Brilliant kids. But no internet, no teachers, no electricity. They spoke of dreams to be engineers, artists, coders, but also of hunger. Of schools with no roofs. Of classrooms with 70 students and one textbook. One girl said, I heard Sundar Pichai is from India too. Maybe he knows how hard this is. Another, we need someone who remembers us. Then came a clip from Rahul himself. We don't need more billion-dollar innovations. We need billion-heart revolutions. Sundar sat back. Silenced the next morning. For the first time in years, he canceled all meetings. A new question. That day, Sundar walked into the office differently. Something had changed. Not in the world, but in him. For too long, he had focused on scale, speed, and success. But Rahul had asked a more human question. Impact. He began pulling data regions. With the least internet access, education deserts, forgotten schools. He reached out to old friends, community builders, local innovators. And slowly, an idea began to take shape. One not aimed at shareholders, but at souls. Not another app. Not a platform, but a movement. Something that could marry everything Sundar had learned with everything he had once left behind. The beginning of Horizon by the end of the week. Sundar made his first unannounced visit to a rural school outside Hyderabad. No media, no entourage. Just him, a notebook, and a question. What do you need most? One teacher answered, someone to believe in us. That night he called Rahul. I don't have all the answers, Sundar said. You never needed to, Rahul replied. You just needed to ask the right questions. And for the first time in a long time, Sundar didn't feel watched. He felt seen. Asterisk. The world didn't slow down just because Sundar Pichai did. Headlines buzzed. Algorithms refreshed. Investors asked questions. But behind the scenes, Sundar had entered a quieter chapter 1, driven not by competition, but by compassion. He had named the initiative Horizon, a vision rooted in the belief that brilliance should never be dictated by geography, wealth, or bandwidth. It wasn't just about connecting people to the internet. It was about connecting them to their potential. But even as momentum built around Horizon, the shadows of Sundar's past hadn't fully lifted. He had started asking different questions, not just what could be done, but why it hadn't been done before. The more he peeled back the layers, the more he realized this wasn't a story about technology. It was a story about humanity. And humanity, no matter how far it advances, always carries echoes of its past, the forgotten classroom Sundar. And Rahul's first joint field visit took them to a dusty village near Varanasi. The heat shimmered off the dirt roads. Children ran barefoot beside their vehicle, waving, giggling. Some had never seen a computer. Others had only seen one in a newspaper. They arrived at a school made of corrugated tin and faded bricks. Inside, a teacher named Mira greeted them. "I read about you once," she said to Sundar, not in awe, but in a calm, grounded tone. "They said you created the world's fastest browser." I thought, what good is speed if we're still waiting? Sundar blinked, stunned by the clarity in her voice. "What do your students dream about?" he asked. Mira smiled faintly. "Sometimes food, sometimes light, and sometimes the stars." They sat in that humble classroom for hours. No press, no Twitter threads, just humans trying to understand one another. At the end of the visit, one boy stood up and asked a question that haunted Sundar for weeks. "Do people in cities think we're slow because we live slow, ... or because they stopped seeing us?" The boardroom tension back in Mountain View. Sundar walked into the executive conference room with a different posture. He laid out Horizon's long-term vision, not as a charitable side project, but a central philosophy. Technology must serve as an equalizer, not an escalator away from empathy. The response was mixed. One board member shifted in her seat. "It's noble," she said carefully, "but it doesn't scale like our other initiatives." Another added, "We're not a nonprofit, Sundar." He responded with rare steel in his voice. "Exactly, we're not. Which is why we have the means to change the equation. And if we don't, who will?" They couldn't argue with that. But the seed of tension had been planted. Sundar wasn't trying to rebel. He was trying to return to something truer than market projections. A whisper from the boy he used to be. Rahul's silence. As Horizon gained attention, Rahul began withdrawing. He skipped 2 meetings, didn't reply to emails. Finally, Sundar flew to Chennai and showed up at Rahul's modest home, unannounced. The walls were lined with books and framed letters from former students. A single ceiling fan spun lazily above their heads. "I didn't sign up to be a co-founder." Rahul said, "I just wanted you to remember." Sundar leaned forward. "But what if remembering is the start of something?" Rahul looked away. "Sundar, you live in a world where people listen because you wear a title. I live in one where they only listen if you bleed first." It wasn't bitterness. It was truth. "You still see yourself as the shadow," Sundar said quietly. "But you're the light behind this." They sat in silence. Finally, Rahul said, "Fine, I'll help. But we do this the right way. No logos on classrooms. No press releases on pain." Sundar smiled. "Deal." The letters weeks later, Horizon launched its pilot. 12 microhubs across underserved areas in India, Kenya, Brazil, and rural America. Equipped with solar panels, recycled tablets, and offline learning systems. Each hub wasn't just a school, it was a sanctuary. The initiative didn't go viral. It went deep. Students began writing letters, not emails, not surveys, but letters, paper and ink. Thoughts from those who had been invisible for too long. "I taught my mother how to write her name today. This was the first time I saw my dream written on a screen. Thank you for not forgetting us." Sundar kept a box of these letters on his desk. Not as trophies, but as truth. One letter arrived with no return address. The handwriting was familiar. "You once told me the best minds should build the best tools. You never said the best tools should only serve the rich. I'm glad you remembered." Sundar folded the letter, heart full. The echo shadows was fading, replaced by something brighter. The unexpected call months into Horizon's rollout. Sundar received a message from a private number. It was an invitation to speak not at a summit or a university, but at a forgotten prison in South Africa. The warden said the inmates had been watching his speeches on contraband phones. One in particular had written a curriculum using Sundar's old TT talks. He hesitated, then agreed. Inside that prison, Sundar faced men who had been discarded by society. One of them, a tall, middle-aged man with eyes too tired for his age, stood up and asked, "You escaped the system." "We couldn't. What would you have become if your zip code had been different?" Sundar answered honestly, "Maybe someone sitting in your seat." Silence. Then applause, not the kind for celebrities, but the kind that says you saw me. The shift from that point on, Sundar's language changed. No longer about users. He spoke of people, no longer about market share. He focused on shared futures. His keynote at the Global Development Summit was unlike anything before. No slides, just a story. He shared Rahul's name. He talked about Mira's school. He told the audience, the next Google won't be born in Silicon Valley. It will rise from a place no one expects because we finally decided to listen. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Then, thunderous applause. A mirror to the world, but change is never linear. Critics emerged. Pichai is romanticizing poverty. This isn't the role of a tech CEO. Alphabet shareholders didn't sign up for a moral crusade. Sundar responded not with defensiveness, but with data and stories. Horizon published its first transparency report. Not about profits, but about possibility. Literacy levels up 300% in test communities. 72% of students were girls. 64% of teachers said they'd never felt so empowered. One infographic showed a photo of a barefoot girl named Anissa holding a tablet under a tree. The caption read, "Connectivity isn't about speed. It's about dignity." The internal turning point back at Alphabet, something changed. A young intern from Nigeria stood during a company town hall and said, "I joined because of what you're doing outside the company. Please don't stop." Others echoed it. The engineers, the designers, the quietly hopeful. They didn't want to build faster tools anymore. They wanted to build fairer ones. And Sundar, he had become not just there. He had become their mirror. Epilogue of Part 2. The echo becomes a voice late one night. Sundar stood atop the Google Plex roof, watching the city lights flicker like neurons in a great thinking brain. Rahul joined him, holding 2 cups of chai. "I didn't expect this," Sundar admitted. "This movement, you never do," Rahul said. Movements don't start when someone raises their voice. They start when someone lowers it just enough to hear what's already there. Below them, a world buzzed on. But above them, in the quiet space between stars, something greater stirred, a whisper, an echo, a reminder that the future doesn't belong to the loudest. It belongs to those who listen. Then build asterisk, the wind carried with it, a scent Sundar hadn't inhaled in decades Earth before rain. As his plane touched down in Chennai, the tarmac shimmered in the heat, but it wasn't the temperature that made him sweat. It was the anticipation. He was coming home not as the CEO of Alphabet, but as Sundar, the boy who once walked barefoot to school with dust-covered notebooks and 1,000 questions nobody could answer. A small Horizon field office had opened nearby. It was simple 3 rooms, donated desks, and 5 fiercely passionate educators. But Sundar wasn't here to cut a ribbon. He was here for something older, more personal. He needed to find the pieces of himself he had left behind. A door, rusted but open. Rahul was waiting outside the old school gate, leaning against the rusted metal with a soft grin. "You really came," he said, handing Sundar a handkerchief like a brother would. "I told you I would," Sundar replied, eyes fixed on the small building in front of him. "I've walked into boardrooms with presidents and billionaires, but this feels harder." "You're not facing them," Rahul said gently. "You're facing yourself." The building hadn't changed much. The same cracked walls, the same chipped paint. But inside it, time had carved out something stronger than cement: memory. Sundar stepped into the classroom where he first learned about diodes, where he once asked the question, what's the smallest thing that can hold the biggest power? He now realized the answer was a mind, a ghost from the past. As they walked the school grounds, an elderly man approached them slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes, milky with age, still held a sharpness that made Sundar pause. "Do you remember me, Beta?" he asked. Sundar's voice caught. "Mr. Venkatesson?" His old science teacher. The man who had once scolded him for daydreaming, only to later buy him a second-hand electronics manual from a roadside stall. "I thought you forgot us," Venkatesson said. "I forgot myself for a while," Sundar replied, voice heavy. "But I remember now. And the old man touched his shoulder. You've gone far, that's good. But always ask yourself, are you still going deep? An unplanned visit later that afternoon, Sundar asked Rahul to take a detour. They arrived at a tiny house tucked behind a Temple Lane, Sundar's childhood home. It had been repainted, the street narrower now, with scooters parked haphazardly. But the front door still had the faded Pichai nameplate. A woman in her late 60s opened the door. His mother, her eyes widened with tears. Sundar. They embraced. No cameras. No handlers. Just mother and son, reuniting in a moment that neither time nor success could dull. She cooked him lunch lemon rice and rasam. He sat on the floor, just like he used to, using his fingers to eat, letting the flavors of his childhood remind him that identity isn't something you build, it's something you return to. The letter he never sent that night, in the same room. He had once studied under a flickering bulb. Sundar pulled out a small yellowed envelope from his bag. It was a letter. Dated 1993, addressed to Rahul. He had never sent it. It was written during his first year in the U.S., when loneliness wrapped itself around his ambition like a second skin. In it, he confessed how lost he felt, how success felt empty without someone to share the climb, how he wished he had stayed back, how scared he was to fail. He handed it to Rahul without a word. Rahul read it quietly. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. All these years, Rahul whispered, I thought you forgot us. But you just needed someone to hold the memory for you. Asterisk roots beneath Silicon Sundar realized something profound that night. He had become the face of progress, but somewhere along the way, he had let place become a footnote in his story. The polished stages, the clean code, the sharp suits, they were chapters, yes? But not the root. The root was this: a tiny home filled with spice and warmth. A school with leaky roofs but unwavering teachers. Friends who stayed not because they lacked ambition, but because they had different definitions of success. Sundar took out a journal and wrote a single line. Build futures, yes, but never forget to tend the roots. Asterisk, the first true expansion. In the following weeks, Horizon launched a new model called Deep Roots. It didn't just bring tablets or teachers. It partnered with local artisans, elders, and storytellers. Children learn not only math and science, but their own histories, their local dialects, their folktales, their food systems, their songs. Asterisk. It wasn't a tech revolution. It was a cultural reclamation. A moment with his father one evening. Before leaving Chennai, Sundar visited the cemetery where his father was buried. He knelt before the gravestone, brushing away dried leaves with his hand. I used to think the goal was to go farther than you ever did, Sundar whispered. Now I understand. The real goal was to go deeper. To build something that wouldn't need me to carry it forever because it could grow on its own. He placed a small transistor next to the headstone. One from the first radio he and his father had built together. A ceremony in silence before leaving. Sundar and Rahul returned to their old school one last time. With the help of students, they planted a banyan sapling in the schoolyard. Beneath it, they buried a small time capsule. Letters from students, photos, pieces of broken chalk. No press, no tweets, just 30 people in a quiet breeze. Rahul turned to the students and said, "This tree will outlive all of us. But one day someone will sit under it and remember that something began here. That someone believed in them before they were ready." Sundar added, "Let this be the first tree planted in a forest we won't see, but must begin anyway." Full circle. When Sundar returned to Mountain View, he didn't return the same. He walked through Google's hallways with different eyes, not seeing just engineers, but future elders, future storytellers. He began restructuring Horizon not around regions, but around relationships. Every launch now had a new metric, not engagement, but enrichment. And at the top of his whiteboard, he wrote 3 words: go deep first. Epilogue of Part 3. The Roots speak back weeks later. Rahul sent Sundar a package. Inside was a poem written by a student in the Chennai school. He left, they said, to build the sky. But now he's back, with hands not high, not to take, but plant, and sell. A forest only hearts can grow. And at the bottom, inscrawled, handwriting. Thank you for remembering where the sky begins from the soil. Asterisk. The global tech stage was never designed for quiet revolutions. It fed on disruption, speed, and spectacle. CEOs were expected to predict the future, not return to the past. But Sundar Pichai wasn't playing that game anymore. Back at the Googleplex, a subtle transformation had begun. It didn't arrive with announcements or keynote slides. It began in the little things, in pauses during meetings, in unexpected trips to horizon sites, in handwritten notes left on engineers' desks praising invisible acts of kindness over measurable KPIs. He had stopped trying to impress the world. Now he was trying to inspire it quietly, precisely, like a carefully written line of code that changed everything in the system without ever being seen. But change, even noble change, always meets resistance. The clash of timelines one Thursday morning. The Alphabet executive boardroom buzzed with tension. Revenue reports were in. Wall Street had questions. AI competitors were accelerating. Yet Sundar wanted to talk about farmers. He stood at the front of the room, sleeves rolled. No slides, just conviction. I recently visited a Horizon hub in Andhra Pradesh. Began. The students are thriving. But what shocked me most were the parents. Farmers, most had never seen a smartphone. They weren't asking for stock tips or app upgrades. They were asking if we could help their children dream again. And executive leaned forward, cautious. With respect, Sundar, this is inspiring. But our shareholders want to see direct returns. Sundar looked at her for a long moment. What if this is the return? He asked. Not in quarterly growth, but in generational resilience. Silence. Another executive tapped a pen against a tablet. We're a tech company, not a movement. No, Sundar said calmly. We're whatever we choose to be. That's the point of technology choice. Legacy by design. That night, Sundar returned home and found a dusty cardboard box in his garage. Inside were old notebooks from his Stanford days, scribbled designs, code drafts, letters from his parents, and at the very bottom a hand-drawn circuit. Map he'd made when he was 12. It wasn't perfect. The logic was crude. But it had one thing his company often forgot: wonder. He stared at it for a long time. Later, he sat down and drafted what he called the Legacy by Design Manifesto. A simple document, 1 page, but powerful. It read, a legacy isn't written in patents or IPOs. It's written in people. And the ideas we plant in children will never meet. In the courage we lend to voices still learning to speak. Let our greatest invention be dignity at scale. Let our technology not just answer questions, but raise better ones. Let us build futures that remember their roots. He shared it with no fanfare. Just an internal post on the company's intranet. Within 72 hours, over 12,000 employees across 17 countries had endorsed it. The resignation that wasn't rumors began to swirl. Is Pichai stepping down? Is Horizon a pivot or a farewell? Has the CEO of the world's most powerful company gone soft? But Sundar didn't address them. Instead, he kept building. He visited refugee camps in Jordan, where children coded poetry into scratch programs. He joined late-night Zooms with community leaders in Detroit. He sat on dirt floors with teachers in Malawi who had turned solar panels into microcharging stations for offline classrooms. The world kept guessing his next move, but Sundar already knew. The letter to his children. One Sunday, he sat on his back porch with a mug of tea, watching his children draw with chalk on the patio. The innocence of their play stirred something inside him, an ache and an awakening. That evening, he wrote them a letter. You may not understand why I miss some dinners or calls, but one day, when you stand before a child who has never been seen, and you choose to see them, I hope you'll know I wasn't building empires. I was building mirrors, so that others could see the light in themselves. He sealed the letter and tucked it into his journal. The turning point. Then came the moment that would define everything. A sudden disaster struck, a earthquake in northern Pakistan destroyed hundreds of schools. Entire villages were without power, clean water, or communication. Sundar didn't hesitate. In less than 48 hours, Horizon converted its Bangalore office into a coordination hub. Engineers volunteered to rebuild infrastructure using portable servers and drone recharge satellite links. Google staff across departments signed up: developers, linguists, map analysts, even cafeteria staff offering meals for relief flights. And for the first time in Alphabet's history, a crisis response was led by a social initiative, not a profit wing. When the first emergency learning hub went live in the wreckage zone, a boy named Amin sent a voice message that went viral. I lost my school, but today I found my dream again. A whisper that roared following the crisis response. Horizon exploded in scale and sold out. Governments offered partnerships. Universities requested training models. Young professionals abandoned high-salary jobs to become Horizon envoys, taking knowledge back to communities that never had it. Sundar remained calm amid the storm. He wasn't chasing legacy anymore. He was living it. One journalist asked him during a rare interview, "You're changing lives, but you've also lost favor with some investors. Do you regret it?" Sundar's reply was quiet but clear. I regret not listening sooner. The loudest voices don't always carry the deepest truth, and profit without purpose is just noise. The Horizon Codex, the culmination of the Horizon movement, came in the form of a global digital library. The Horizon Codex, built in dozens of languages, accessible offline and adaptable by local educators. It wasn't a static tool, it was a living system. Each codex chapter opened with a quote from the students who inspired it. I taught my father to read using this app. We made our own windmill today. I want to be a teacher, so I can light more candles. And in the footer of every page, one line was etched in Sundar's own hand. Knowledge belongs to no one, but it can elevate everyone. A legacy rewritten. The final Horizon Summit was held in a small amphitheater in Morocco. There were no fireworks, no product launches, just stories. Real stories. One by one, children from 20 countries took the stage. They shared poems, prototypes, songs, and statistics. Not to impress, but to prove what could happen when the invisible are seen. Sundar stood at the edge of the stage, eyes shining. Rahul whispered beside him, "You know, this was always in you. We just had to remove the noise." Sundar smiled. "And build something that listens." Asterisk, by the time the first Horizon Codex reached its millionth user, something remarkable had happened. Sundar Pichai had stopped being seen as a CEO. He had become a conduit, a vessel for a growing global movement that no longer needed his name to gain traction. The faces of the movement were no longer polished executives or platform evangelists. They were 9-year-olds in Tanzania who built wind-powered phone chargers from bottle caps. Elders in Guatemala preserving Mayan math through digital storytelling. Displaced girls in Syria teaching one another through Horizon's MeshNet learning hubs. It was no longer about scaling impact. It was about transferring ownership. A new question. Sundar stood on the rooftop of an unfinished Horizon Center in Sierra Leone. Below, a team of local architects trained not by universities, but by watching Horizon's open source construction modules were laying out plans for the country's first community-powered tech library. A young volunteer named Zainab approached. "You look tired," she said gently. Asterisk. "Building a better world isn't exactly restful," he replied. Smiling. She looked out at the horizon and asked, "When do you stop being the builder and just become the bridge?" That question followed him across continents. Internal. Earthquake back in California. Sundar called an all-hands meeting for Alphabet's top leadership. But this time, he brought in 3 unexpected guests. A farmer from Marissa, a teacher from rural Mexico, and a 15-year-old coder from Nairobi. They were given 10 minutes to speak. They didn't use charts. They told stories. The teacher described converting a Horizon tablet into a multi-language lesson generator with only local dialects. The farmer showed how his solar-powered drone hacked together from spare fan parts, monitored his fields with a basic iScript. The boy from Nairobi had built a local safety app that mapped drinking water locations in the slums and pinged alerts during outages. Silence filled the room. Then Sundar spoke. These aren't anomalies, they're reminders. We are not the only source of innovation. We are not the keepers of progress. We are merely removers of barriers. Letting go 1 week later, Sundar made the decision that would define the end of one chapter and the launch of something far greater. He began the formal process to transition leadership of Horizon to a global council of community representatives. No central CEO, no top-down strategy, just a shared compass. Elevation without extraction. People were stunned. A journalist asked him, "You spent your life building this. Why give it away now?" He smiled. Because real power is knowing when to release it. The quiet flame Rahul, now regarded as the heart of Horizon, rarely appeared in interviews. But at Sundar's request, he agreed to speak publicly at a small summit in Bhutan focused on conscious innovation. His voice was calm, almost whisper-like. When you plant a seed, you don't sit above it yelling at it to grow. You give it water, you give it shade, you let go of control. That's what Sundar did. That's what Horizon is. Not a product, not a protocol, a quiet flame, passed from hand to hand. Beyond the algorithm at Alphabet, Sundar spent his final months reworking the company's internal culture documents. Under a new initiative called Code with Conscience, every product review now included a social impact query. Who might this product leave behind? What began as a pilot soon became a global standard. Horizon-trained empathy architects began joining product teams to evaluate human impact, not just technical feasibility. One engineer, who had spent 6 years on Google Maps, said, "For the first time, I'm not just mapping locations. I'm mapping lives." The second Horizon, Horizon 2.0, wasn't a relaunch. It was a redistribution. Every tool Sundar and his team had built, from curriculum frameworks to learning kits, was released open source. No patents, no trademarks, just free, global, community-driven knowledge. It was chaos at first. Some misused the tools. Others rebranded them. Critics said the model was unsustainable. But then something extraordinary happened. From Nairobi to Nepal, from Oakland to Orissa, people remixed Horizon. They blended indigenous wisdom with local folklore with logic puzzles. They created what Sundar called cultural code bases. Every village, every district, every digital enclave had its own dialect of learning. It wasn't standardized. It was sovereign. A visit to the edge on the 100th installation of a second. Horizon learning node in the freezing plateau village of Tawang. Arunachal Pradesh, Sundar made an unannounced visit. No one recognized him. He sat in the back, watching a group of children troubleshoot solar wiring while their teacher connected an offline network to upload their latest science project, a documentary on Himalayan medicinal herbs. One boy noticed Sundar and offered him a snack. You here to fix something?" he asked. Sundar smiled. "No, I think you already did." A message to the next builders. Sundar was invited to deliver one final talk, not to the World Economic Forum or to shareholders, but to a group of 200 Horizon fellows under the age of 20. He stood with no slides, no script, just presence. He said, "The first Horizon was about connection. The second is about contribution. The third, the one you'll build, is about co-creation. You don't need permission to begin, just purpose." A departure, not an exit. Later that year, Sundar made it official. He stepped down from all formal roles at Alphabet. He declined a farewell gala. No press tour. No memoir. Instead, he left a single note on the company's internal homepage. "We searched the world. Now let us learn from it." His final act? Donating 98% of his equity in Horizon to the communities who had taught him what innovation truly meant. He signed the paperwork, closed the folder, and walked out quietly. Not a titan fading, but a torch passed. Epilogue of Part 5, The Mountain. That bowed years later, a group of Horizon students built a sculpture in Ladakh, carved from reclaimed tech parts and shaped like a banyan tree. Its branches formed interlocking circuits at the base. A single line engraved in 20 languages. He didn't lead with his voice. He led with his absence, so others could rise. And when the wind blew just right, the branches hummed softly, as if whispering, "The future is not invented by giants, but by those who remember the soil beneath their feet." Asterisk, it had been exactly 1 year since Sundar Pichai left the only role the world ever known him by. No headlines now, no corporate keynotes. He had vanished from the front pages like smoke, from a sacred fire visible only by the warmth it left behind. And yet, his presence had never been stronger. From the mountain villages of Peru to the war-torn outskirts of Khartoum, his legacy lived in quiet revolutions. In places where dreams had once decayed beneath dust, they now blossomed. Not because of charity, but because of change that took root. This was not Sundar Pichai, the CEO. This was Sundar Pichai, the spark, the banyan and the boy in the same Chennai schoolyard where his story began. A banyan tree now stood tall. Its roots had split concrete. Its shade spread across the classroom walls. Children sat beneath it daily reading, coding, writing stories. Each year, on what locals now called the Day of the Quiet Flame, a ceremony was held beneath that tree. No medals, no speeches. Just reflection. This year, Sundar returned not as a guest of honor, but as a quiet observer. He wore no suit, no entourage, just sandals, a notebook, and silence. A young boy approached him. "Are you the man who planted the tree?" Sundar smiled. "No, I just helped water it." The boy pointed to a plaque beneath the tree and read aloud, "This tree was planted by those who once sat here, for those who will sit here tomorrow." The boy didn't understand the full weight of those words, but he would. One day, the final horizon, after stepping down from formal roles, Sundar had quietly assembled a small team of educators, ethicists, farmers, designers, and youth leaders to draft one last vision, one not for a product or a program, but for human possibility. They called it Horizon 3. The reciprocity area was simple, almost poetic. Technology that listens before it speaks. Data that belongs to communities, not companies. Intelligence not as artificial, but amplified humanity. Progress measured not in GDP, but in generational uplift. No launch event. Just a PDF sent to 12,000 community nodes and made available free to the world. And it spread like fire and dry grass fast. Uncontainable and strangely comforting. An unexpected letter one morning. Sundar received a package wrapped in cloth. Inside was an old photograph, his teenage self outside the school gate. Next to it, a note from a girl in Senegal who had translated the Horizon Codex into her tribe's dialect. "You don't know me, but because of you, my village now learns under stars and solar lamps. Because of you, we stopped asking why not us, and started saying we will. You gave us no answers, only light." She signed it, child of the second horizon. Sundar wept quietly, not from sadness, but from recognition. A circle completed years ago, a stranger had followed Sundar for 3 days. That man Rahul had held a mirror up to him, asking a question so powerful it cracked his trajectory in half. Now, it was Sundar's turn. He traveled to a remote mountaintop retreat in Sikkim, where Rahul had been living in seclusion, helping a monastery digitize ancient Tibetan texts. They didn't speak at first. They sat together by the fire, sharing warmth and silence. Then Sundar reached into his coat and handed Rahul a sealed envelope. Inside, a single quote from Mira, teacher from that tin-roofed school. "The world doesn't need another savior. It needs a memory, a seed, and someone brave enough to sit in the soil." Rahul smiled. "So, you finally stopped building?" Sundar shook his head. "No, I just started building things I don't need to own." They laughed softly like boys again. Asterisk the candle ritual back in Chennai. A new tradition had begun. Every quiet flame day, students gathered at dusk, each lighting a candle and placing it beneath the banyan tree. Not for Sundar, for whoever they would become next. And that night, Sundar stayed late, watching the flames flicker. One child approached him shyly. "My name is Aruvi," she said. "My mother says you were once invisible like us." He nodded. "I still am, in the right light." She handed him a drawing her version of the Horizon Codex, made from colored paper and tape. "I'm going to build my own," she said proudly. He looked at it, deeply moved. "You already have." Asterisk, the final message years later. A journalist who had followed Horizon's story asked him for one last interview. He declined. Instead, he sent a message, his only formal statement in almost a decade. It read, "We are not here to dominate the world with knowledge. We are here to democratize the right to become